The lawyer's final document was in my hand. All it needed was my signature to make it official. My son, David, was standing right there in front of me, pleading, his voice cracking under the weight of a choice he'd already made. "Mom, please," he whispered, the words raw and desperate. "Just apologize to Chloe. For the sake of our family. For Oliver. Just say you're sorry for overstepping. That's all she needs to move on." And from the doorway of my own sitting room, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just looked at me with this ice-cold smirk of absolute victory. It was in the slight tilt of her head, the calm, dismissive arch of an eyebrow. She knew she'd won. She'd finally, completely, made her husband choose between us, and he'd chosen her. In that suspended moment, looking from my son's tear-filled, begging eyes to her triumphant, gloating sneer, something inside me shattered. But not into pieces. It shattered into something hard and clear. The trembling in my hands stopped. I uncapped my pen with a quiet, definitive click. I didn't even look at the formal apology letter they'd drafted for me to sign. I turned it over. Beneath it was the other document, the one my own lawyer, a fierce woman named Rita, had insisted I have prepared. "Just in case your hand is ever forced," she'd said. And with a certainty that shocked even me, I put pen to that page. I signed my name. Hazel Margaret Greer. Because if I was forbidden from touching her pristine, stainless steel kingdom, her perfect kitchen, then I realized there was something infinitely more valuable of hers I could reach. I could touch the very future she thought she owned. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened after that signature didn't just change a will, it shattered an illusion and changed the entire balance of our family forever. It redefined what power really looks like. And if you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own child's life, like your love is an inconvenience, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more stories about quietly reclaiming your power. But to understand why that signature was the last straw, the final act of a woman pushed past silence, you have to go back to the beginning. To a time when I mistook her coldness for shyness, and her rules for the quirks of a nervous new mother. Back to when I was so desperately hungry for a place in my grandchild's world that I was willing to swallow my pride, to make myself smaller and smaller, until she drew a line in the sand so deep, so deliberately cruel, that I could never unsee it. My name is Hazel, and this is my story. The story really begins in a place of flower and sunlight. My little cottage. After my Robert passed, the world got very quiet, but this house was full of him. Of us. The kitchen table was worn from decades of elbows and homework and shared meals. It was a comfortable, lived-in kind of place, smelling of rosemary from my garden and the sugar cookies I'd make just to feel a sense of purpose. My son, David, was my entire heart. He's a kind man, gentle, maybe a little too eager to please, a trait I worried about, even then. When he met Chloe, I was just so happy he'd found someone. She was elegant, poised, with a career in design. A bit reserved, but I told myself she was just shy. I was determined to be the warm, open mother-in-law, the safe harbor. Then came the phone call that filled my world with color again. David's voice was pure joy. "Mom, you're going to be a grandma." I slid down the wall right there in my hallway and sobbed, the happy, healing kind of tears I hadn't felt in years. A new sunrise. Suddenly, my quiet loneliness had a purpose. I turned the spare room into a grandma's nest, knitting tiny blankets, buying classic storybooks, imagining all the laughter and mess and love that would fill these quiet rooms. I was ready to be her rock, Chloe's, if she'd let me. The first visit to their new home told a different story. It was stunning, like a magazine spread, all clean lines, cool grays, and surfaces that reflected light but held no warmth. I brought my famous apple pie, my offering of love. Chloe took it with a polite, tight smile. "You shouldn't have," she said, and placed it on the vast, empty counter, where it sat, untouched, a homesick island in a sea of minimalist perfection. I watched David, my usually relaxed boy, nervously track my movements as I admired a strange, sculptural vase. "Careful, Mom," he said, a slight edge in his voice. That was from Chloe's design trip to Copenhagen. I laughed it off, making a joke about my clumsy hands, but a tiny, cold seed was planted. I was an invited guest, yes, but one who might accidentally break the carefully curated display. I was so eager for a role, any role, that I missed the first, soft whisper of a warning. In this new, beautiful world they were building, there might not be a place for a flour-dusted, pie-baking grandma. I was too busy dreaming of tomorrow to see the walls going up today. When Oliver was born, I felt like my soul had wings. I rushed to the hospital with a blanket I'd knitted, so soft, each stitch a prayer. Chloe was exhausted, pale, but her eyes were sharp. When I reached into the bassinet to gently adjust the blanket around his tiny shoulders, her hand shot out like a viper. She retucked the fabric with a precise, clinical motion. "We're following a very specific swaddling technique, Hazel," she said, her voice flat. "For his spinal alignment and security." The joy in my chest curdled, just a little. In their home, I ached to be useful. "Just point me to the kitchen," I'd say, rolling up my sleeves. "Oh, everything is on a schedule," she'd deflect, her body a subtle barrier between me and the bottle warmer, the sanitizer. "The water must be exactly 104 degrees. It's easier if I just do it." Easier for whom? I was demoted to supervised visitation, sitting stiffly on their pristine sofa while the real life, my grandson's life, happened just out of reach, often behind a partly closed nursery door. David became her translator. "She's just protective, Mom. It's her first baby. She's read all the books." I wanted to say I'd lived the book, but I bit my tongue. One afternoon, lost in memory, I began humming an old lullaby, one I'd sung to David 1,000 times. His face lit up. "Sing it, Mom. Sing it for him." But before I could draw a breath, Chloe's voice cut through from the hallway. "Actually, we're playing curated white noise frequencies during this nap window. It's to encourage neural synapse development. Maybe later." The maybe later never came. It was the first of many vanished promises. The classic, jingly toy rabbit I brought Oliver disappeared by my next visit. "It was overstimulating," she explained without a hint of regret. "The beautiful, wooden blocks. A choking hazard beyond his current developmental stage. My offerings, my outstretched hands of love, were systematically and politely batted away. Each rejected gift, each corrected gesture, was a paper cut small, but they were starting to bleed. I began to feel like a ghost in their home. I could see them, I could hear their lives, but I couldn't interact, couldn't leave a fingerprint. My love, my decades of experience, it was all being translated into a single, damning word in a language I didn't speak: interference. Then came the afternoon I made the fatal mistake of trying to feed my own grandson. David had handed me the bottle. It was a simple, profound act of trust. And as I brought it to Oliver's lips, I looked up and saw Chloe watching from the doorway. Her expression wasn't just disapproval. It was a pure, blazing possessiveness. In that moment, I knew this was about more than bottles or blankets. This was a battle for territory I hadn't even known I was in. The protective new mother mask began to slip, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath. The motives shifted. It was no longer about what was best for Oliver, it was about what solidified her control. I overheard them one evening, their hushed argument leaking from the kitchen as I played with Oliver on the floor. Chloe's voice was a sharp, frustrated whisper. "She's here every Sunday. It's disrupting our routine. Our family time." David's reply was muffled, pleading. "She's my mother, Chloe. She's lonely." And then the words that froze me, "And that's our problem to solve. We have our own family to build now." The word burden hung in the air, unspoken but more potent for its absence. She wasn't just pushing me out for the baby's sake, she was clearing space for her own vision, and I was clutter. Her disdain began to extend to my entire life. When she visited my cottage, her eyes would skim over the framed photos, the well-loved furniture, the cozy clutter of a life fully lived. "It's so full of things, Hazel," she said once, a faint smile on her lips. "Have you ever considered minimalist living? It's so much better for the psyche." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a critique of my very existence, of the home I'd built with Robert. Then came Oliver's first birthday, the real unveiling. It was held at her parents' lavish country club. I felt like a visitor from another planet in my simple dress. My gift was a beautifully iced, homemade cake, vanilla with lemon buttercream, David's childhood favorite. Chloe's mother, Sylvia, surveyed it with a thin, polite smile. How labor-intensive. Chloe promptly moved it to a side table, where it sat next to towering, fondant-covered professional masterpiece. Later, seeking a slice for David, I pushed through the kitchen door only to see a staff member scraping the last of my cake, barely touched, into a large trash bin. The crumbs of my labor, my love, fell onto coffee grounds and discarded napkins. Chloe appeared behind me, noticing my frozen stance. She didn't flinch. "We had so much dessert, Hazel," she said with a shrug. "It would have just gone stale." The cruelty was so casual, so effortless. And David? He was across the room, playing the gracious host, completely absent. That's when the blueprint became clear. This wasn't just about raising a child. It was about building a dynasty. Her family's world, their money, their taste, their country club values, was to be Oliver's inheritance. My homemade cakes, my cozy cottage, my very essence. I was a relic from the past she was trying to overwrite. I was no longer just an interfering mother-in-law. I was a competing narrative. A smudge on the perfect, minimalist portrait of the family she was curating. And she would erase me, detail by gentle, ruthless detail. The birthday party wasn't a celebration, it was a preview. She wasn't just building a life with my son. She was methodically building a new life over the one he came from. And I was the foundation that needed to be quietly, permanently removed. The invitations dwindled. Not officially, of course. It was always a text from David, full of regret. "Oliver's schedule is so packed this weekend, Mom." Or, "We're spending the day with Chloe's parents." The silence in my cottage grew heavier, a physical weight. I'd find myself standing in the little grandma's nest, running my hand over the empty crib, staring at the storybooks no one would ever hear me read. The loneliness was a hollow ache, a hunger with no meal in sight. I'd look at baby pictures of David, his gummy smile, and I'd weep, mourning the open, effortless love I once had, the love I thought was a promise for the future. Talking to him on the phone became a lesson in brevity. Our conversations were short, punctuated by Oliver's distant cry or Chloe calling for him from another room. I could hear the checklist in his voice. "Call Mom." Check. I was becoming an item on his to-do list, a chore to be managed. The erosion was so slow, so polite, I almost didn't notice I was disappearing. The real breaking point, though, happened in the frozen food aisle of the supermarket. I saw a young mother, a stranger, wrestling a grocery cart with one hand and a fussing toddler with the other. A bag of peas tumbled to the floor. Instinct took over. I swooped in, picked it up, and steadied her cart with a smile. She looked at me with such profound relief. "Thank you so much," she breathed. "Grandma to the rescue." The word grandma hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a title given freely, with gratitude, by a complete stranger. And it shattered me. Because I was a grandma. I had the title. But I was denied the role. I was a grandmother who was terrified to hug her grandson too long for fear of criticism, who second-guessed every gift, who felt like an intruder during visits. I walked to my car on unsteady legs, got inside, and the dam broke. I sobbed into the steering wheel, my whole body shaking with a grief I couldn't name. The internal questions were a vicious chorus. Was I too much? Too clingy? Was my love really so outdated, so damaging? Had I become the burden she claimed I was? In that raw, broken moment, I truly considered surrendering. Maybe I should just become the distant, photo frame grandma. Send a check on birthdays, see them twice a year. Maybe if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, almost invisible, I could keep a tiny thread of connection to my son and my grandson. So I decided to try. One last time. I would be perfect. I would be a ghost of a grandma, helpful but silent, present but unobtrusive. And with that fragile resolution, I went for a visit the following week. I walked straight into the heart of her domain, with the best of intentions. And that was the moment I handed her the match that would burn our bridge to the ground. I arrived at their house determined to be the picture of benign, useful support. I saw the aftermath of lunch, a sink full of baby bottles and tiny plastic bowls. A tangible need. Without a word, I rolled up my sleeves, ran the hot water, and picked up the sponge. I was careful, so careful, using the designated brush. I was lost in the simple, meditative act of service, of helping my family, when I felt the temperature in the room drop. Chloe stood in the kitchen entrance, her body rigid. "What are you doing?" Her voice was low, a controlled tremor beneath the ice. I turned with a warm, hopeful smile. "Just helping out, sweetheart. You go relax with Oliver." I'll never forget the look on her face. It wasn't annoyance. It was pure, unadulterated horror, as if she'd caught me bathing her child in acid. She strode over, her hand snapping out to turn off the faucet. The silence was deafening. "I told you," she said, each word a sharp, separate dagger. "We have a system. The bottles require a specific enzymatic rinse, then the sterilizer cycle. Not this." She gestured at my soapy water with utter contempt. My heart was pounding, but I clung to a brittle cheerfulness. Oh, a little soap and hot water never hurt David. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the grenade pin. Her composure vaporized. "Oliver is not David," she snarled, her voice rising. "This is not your house. This is my kitchen." She spat the words, claiming the territory with a ferocity that stunned me. "You don't just come in here and touch things. You don't respect my systems, my rules, my space. From now on, do not touch anything in this kitchen. Do not even offer to touch anything. Consider it off-limits. The finality of it. The eviction." And then David walked in. He saw my shocked, wet hands, Chloe's heaving shoulders, the battlefield of the sink. His face paled. Chloe turned to him, and in a breathtaking instant, the fury melted into trembling, wounded tears. A masterful performance. "David, she's not listening to me. About Oliver's health, about our home. I can't have this stress." The trap was sprung. My son, my gentle boy, looked from his weeping wife to his shell-shocked mother. The plea in his eyes wasn't for understanding, it was for compliance. "Mom," he said, his voice weak, defeated. Maybe just don't do the dishes, okay? Just don't do the dishes." In that sentence, he ratified her decree. He sided with the territorial claim. The betrayal was quiet and total. I was no longer his mother in that moment. I was a problem for him to manage. I dried my hands, the gesture feeling like a surrender. As I gathered my things to leave, my spirit crushed, Chloe's voice stopped me at the door. It was sweet again, laced with a venomous triumph. "Oh, Hazel. We're updating our wills soon. Life insurance, guardianship provisions for Oliver. My parents' lawyer is handling it. Very top tier. Just so you know." It was a power move, a reminder of where the real authority, the real family planning, resided. It wasn't a share of information. It was a flex. As I drove home in the dark, the words my kitchen echoed, a cruel mantra. And then, cutting through the humiliation, a cold, clear thought emerged. I thought of the one thing that was still, unquestionably and legally, mine. The thing her parents' fancy lawyer would undoubtedly have his eye on. My cottage. The inheritance it represented. She'd drawn her line in the sand. Now, I would draw mine in ink. The silence that followed that kitchen confrontation was the deepest yet. It felt permanent. So when my phone rang in the dead of night, David's voice frantic, my own heart seized with fear. "Mom, it's Chloe's dad. A heart attack. They're flying out tonight. Can you please come stay with Oliver? We have no one else." The plea in his voice was genuine, and my own resolve, my hurt, evaporated. They needed me. The grandma, not the ghost. I threw clothes in a bag and drove through the darkness, a singular mission fueling me, be there for my grandson. I let myself in at dawn with the key they'd never asked for back. Oliver was just waking. I lifted him from his crib, his warm, sleepy weight a balm on my soul. We had a quiet, precious morning. Just us. This was the communion I'd been starving for. Then, the front door crashed open. The crisis was over, the scare was minor. They were home a day early. I was at the counter, Oliver in his high chair, giggling as I fed him tiny bites of softly scrambled egg from my fingers. It was a scene of perfect, messy, grandmotherly love. Chloe entered the kitchen first, her suitcase dropping with a thud. She took in the scene, the small pan on the stove, the open fridge, her son's face smeared with yolk, smiling at me. Her expression wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was a pure, undiluted rage. "What are you doing?" she hissed. I smiled, nervous but hopeful. "He was hungry, sweetheart. We're having a lovely time." She stormed past me, inspecting the pan, peering into the fridge. "You used the non-stick pan. You know it's for eggs only. Did you weigh his portion? And is this whole milk?" Her voice was screeching upward. David appeared, trying to wedge himself between us. "Honey, it's fine, he's eating, look at him," but Chloe whirled on me, all pretense gone. I told you not to touch anything in my kitchen. You have no respect. You just bulldoze in here with your outdated, unscientific ways. You think because you're grandma you know better? You're a burden, Hazel." She screamed it. A constant, interfering burden who can't follow the simplest instructions. Oliver began to wail. David stood frozen, a statue of helpless agony. And in my bag upstairs were the documents from my own lawyer, a proposed new will leaving my cottage to David and a trust for Oliver. I'd brought them as a peace offering, a desperate attempt to buy my way back into their good graces with the only currency I thought they valued. I looked from Chloe's furious, contorted face to my son's. His eyes locked on mine, and he didn't defend me. He didn't tell her to stop. Instead, his lips moved in a silent, desperate plea, "Just apologize." And seeing his surrender, a slow, ice-cold smirk of absolute victory returned to Chloe's face. She had won. My heart didn't break then. It crystallized. The trembling, the desperation, it all stopped, replaced by a terrifying, glacial calm. I didn't say a word. I walked upstairs, past the nursery door that had always been a barrier, to the guest room. I opened my bag. My hands were steady. I took out my pen. I looked at the will that would gift them my home. Then I pulled out the other document, the one my lawyer Rita had titled Alternative Directive. The one that listed charities instead of heirs. And I signed my name. Not an apology. A revocation. My revenge was not a shout, it was a signature, and then a silence that spoke volumes. It was legal, precise, and utterly cold. My lawyer, Rita, sent the formal letters. The cottage was being placed into an irrevocable charitable trust. Upon my passing, it would be sold, and every penny would fund a children's literacy program at the local library, the very one where I used to take David for story hour. Not a single cent would flow to David or Chloe. Furthermore, my savings were restructured into an annuity, ensuring my comfort for life, with the remainder also directed to community causes. David called me, his voice a mixture of confusion and panic. "Mom, what is this? This is insane. What about Oliver's future? His college fund?" My voice was quieter than it had ever been, and that seemed to frighten him most. "Oliver's future is his parents' responsibility, David. As you've both made perfectly clear, my influence is neither wanted nor appropriate. I'm simply aligning my legacy with that reality." Chloe's facade crumbled into sheer, sputtering fury. She demanded David fix it, unleashing a pressure that began to crack the very foundation of their perfect life. They tried to visit, a sudden wave of forced warmth and concern, but I was cordial, distant, a gracious hostess in my own home, the home they no longer had a claim to. The power dynamic had irrevocably flipped. I began to live, truly live, for myself. I took a pottery class and made lopsided, joyful mugs. I traveled with a seniors group to see the autumn leaves. I volunteered at the library, reading to children who climbed onto my lap without a single rule about proper posture. I posted pictures of my new life, my genuine smiles. The ultimate, poetic twist came through the grapevine. Chloe's parents, who had always viewed my modest property as a future asset to be absorbed into the family portfolio, were livid. Their financial support, the promised down payment for David and Chloe's forever home, suddenly became conditional. Harmonious family relations were now a clause. The money they'd dangled was retracted, the strings pulled taut. The financial future they'd assumed was a given had vaporized because Chloe couldn't hide her contempt. The tension between her and David became a living thing in their pristine house. My act wasn't about inflicting pain, it was about reclaiming my legacy and redirecting my love to where it was actually valued. I didn't touch her kitchen. I touched the foundation of her assumptions, the assumption that my assets were already hers, that my love could be insulted without cost, that I was too old and too lonely to fight back. I showed her that a woman who could build a home from nothing knows exactly how to protect it. The final call from David came months later, his voice hollow with a dawning understanding. Chloe's parents, they're pulling back. Everything's conditional now. Mom, what did you do? Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges, not to erase them, but to make the shape of things clearer. I found a profound peace I hadn't known in years. My life is vibrant now, filled with the laughter of new friends and the quiet satisfaction of purpose. My cottage is truly my sanctuary, no longer a future bargaining chip, but a home alive with present joy. David, after what I understand were many tense months and strained conversations, began to visit alone. The first time, he looked like a stranger seeing a familiar place for the first time. He was softer, more tentative, and the guilt in his eyes had been replaced by a weary, hard-won respect. He'd lost something, and in that loss, he finally began to see its value. We are rebuilding, brick by careful brick, a new relationship on honest ground, one where he is a guest in my world, one where he respects boundaries he now understands have weight. Oliver comes with him now. We bake cookies in my kitchen, and we make glorious, terrible messes. Flour on the floor, chocolate chips under the table, and his giggles ringing against the walls that will now shelter stories, not just store them. Chloe is not part of this picture. Their marriage, from what glimpses I get, is a tense, quiet thing, held together by shared duty and a son. I hear she's become oddly obsessed with minimalist grandma influencers online, trying to learn how to perform a role she rejected when it was offered to her authentically. The irony isn't lost on me. It's a hollow pantomime. The inheritance I touched was never just money and brick, it was the leverage they used to diminish me. By removing it, I removed their power to define my place. I have my grandson's sticky-handed hugs in my own kitchen. I have my son's respect, earned the hardest way possible. And I have the deep, unshakable peace of knowing that my legacy will nurture a community of children, fostering a love of stories in the very place my own son learned to love them. The circle, though broken for a time, has not just closed, it has widened. I hope my story reminds you of a simple, fierce truth. Family is not a right you earn by blood, it's a privilege you maintain through mutual respect. And that privilege can be revoked when the respect is gone. Never, ever let someone make you feel like a guest in your own child's life, or a beggar for your grandchild's love. You have a value that exists far beyond what you can do for others. Your love, your history, the legacy you've built, these are yours to bestow, not theirs to demand. And sometimes, the strongest, most difficult act of love isn't holding on tighter, it's having the courage to let go of the people who force you to shrink yourself. It's about redirecting that vast, resilient love to those who cherish it, or even to the wider, waiting world that needs it so much more. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. Protecting your peace is not revenge. It is survival. And you, my dear, deserve to survive, and to thrive, with your dignity not just intact, but shining. Never underestimate a woman who knows her own worth, especially after she's been told, for years, that she was worth nothing. Be kind to yourselves. And remember, your kitchen, whatever it symbolizes in your life, is your own. Thank you for listening to mine.